morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you're joining from today. My name is Eric Kimberling here with our Tuesday live stream related to digital and business transformation. I'm going to introduce the guest here in just a moment, but today's topic is going to be the future of supply chain management. So we're going to talk about trends and careers in supply chain management. And if you've listened to this live stream before or listened to my podcast, you know that I talk about a pretty broad array of topics that relate to business and digital transformation. And today we'll hone in on the whole supply chain concept, which is a pretty hot topic for a number of reasons for much of the world here today. Before I introduce my guest, though, just a couple of things. We're going to invite you to ask questions along the way, you, the audience. So any questions you might have, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We're live here today on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So any of those platforms you're watching on, please feel free to drop in the chat any questions you have along the way. And in fact, as we're getting started here, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat where in the world you're joining from today. We usually have a pretty global audience. And today my guest and I are on two different sides of the world. So it's a global discussion here today with our interview, but also the attendees are typically global as well. So drop in the chat where you're joining from today. We'd love to hear where you are, where in the world you are today. So today's guest is Dr. Muddassir, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name. Throughout the interview, hopefully I start to get that name or the exact pronunciation, the Arabic pronunciation correct. But in the meantime, I may butcher it a little bit, so I apologize for that. But Muddassir Ahmed he's the CEO and founder of SCM Dojo. And it's a training course. I'll let him describe it, but scmdojo.com is the website that you can check out, and I'll have him describe it here in a second. But I wanted to have Dr. Ahmed on the show to talk about some of the supply chain issues, being that he's a supply chain guru of sorts. So Muddassir, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thanks for having me. I've been watching your TikTok videos and your YouTube channel is pretty fantastic. So thanks, great to be connected. And you get me on the show on your Tuesday podcast. Looking forward for discussion. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for being here all the way from Dubai. So you're based in Dubai, and maybe just before we jump into the questions I have for you to start, and any questions that the audience might have, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe a little bit about your background, and as well as what SCM Dojo is and what SCM Dojo does.
Yeah, sure. So start from myself, because STM Dojo is kind of linked with my background as well. So I'm an engineer by trade, originally from Pakistan, then went to Sweden, did my master's in management of production supply chain. This is where I basically get into the field. But I always thought I have a research mindset, and now I got a PhD scholarship on a couple of schools. So I choose Lancaster University Management School, went as a PhD scholar, and I was working for a company called Eaton. So it was like a kind of funded project. And then Eaton said, why don't you work full time with us and we'll fund your PhD? I said, yeah, that sounds good to me. So basically, then I worked for Eaton, is an American company, from 2005 until 2017, and I did a lot of jobs, almost all the jobs in supply chain: buyer, demand planner, materials manager, supply chain manager, manufacturing manager, logistics director. I've done all of that, hands up. Then when I finished my PhD in 2015-16, I realized there's not a lot of practical content. So, there was a lot of content out there from we call it this inbound marketing people, social media influencers, especially on the digital marketing people, top 10 ways how to improve your LinkedIn profile, or, top 10 people to follow in wherever. I just realized that there's not enough practical content for the supply chain, because it's very much descriptive. And being a supply chain person, I realize also that if you think about these standard chartered bodies like Apex or SIPS or ISM, I mean, they have done, all of them have done a great job, but they just push theory so much. But if you go into the field of supply chain, theory is important, theory is relative, is a hygiene factor, you need it. But what makes you differentiated from your competition or your peers is how good you are in understanding technology, and how good you are understanding the people side of this. If that means your leadership skills, your communication skills, your networking skills, managing up, managing down, so on and so forth. I come up with this model of I want to write a content which is helpful for the supply chain people, because basically whatever I've learned in 12, 13 years in industry. So I started with my own name, Muddassir, that was a blog. For example, I started writing things like 18 ways how to reduce inventory, or 25 different interview questions, because I interview a lot of people or give a lot of interviews as well. So it resonated with people. And then I think 17, 18, one of my bosses moved to Dubai. He was the head of Bridgestone, and he said, why don't you come for us? So I was the head of planning and operations for Bridgestone. So when I come to Dubai, actually, people start inviting me into a lot of conferences as a speaker or etc. And I just realized I should change the brand into something more useful. So hence the birth of STM Dojo, July 2018. Dojo is a Japanese word which means place to stay and meditate. So it's coming from this whole judo karate background. So the vision of STM Dojo is to help supply chain functions and supply chain community to do better in their job. So, and what I mean by to do better in their job and solve problems. So, for example, if you're looking for courses, we have a best-in-class tutors here. We have on-demand courses on. I have a course on SNOP, sourcing, modern warehousing, and we have recorded about 27 courses which will be going live. What is very interesting we have is the best practices. So, for example, if you want to have a SOP of how to do stock take or cycle counting or plan for every part, or basically your boss asks you, oh, let's improve our KPI, supply chain KPI dashboard. So all of them you can come to SEO Dojo, you can buy, you can download, you can customize, you can look very good in front of boss. I don't mind. Actually, you can sell it as well if you like. I don't really care either way. Right. So we got a lot of best practice content, and we also have a lot of self-assessment tools which management consultants sell it for thousands of dollars. So for example, one of the famous ones I have is the materials management competency assessment, which got around 11 categories, 78 different questions. So if you're a supply chain manager, supply chain director, or supply chain or professional any in general, so if you want to know how good you are into all dimensions of supply chain materials management, you can go to smdojo/tools, conduct the tools, and then it will give you a spider chart at the end. It will tell you the gaps you have in your knowledge, and you can improve. So we have a lot of self-assessment tools, a lot of best practice guides and content, and our aim is to become platform. What I mean by platform is it's not just me. We got 11, 12 different contributors, and the idea is to have people like you, Eric, and any other supply chain leaders and expert listening to this podcast come and join me, contact me, and will you have an as an expert, so you can we can help you distribute your own knowledge into some kind of product. So our vision is to become the go-to place for supply chain community when it comes to knowledge, content, and access, and mentoring as well.
Yeah, that's great, and it's a great model, and I think you've identified a significant need in the marketplace for that practical knowledge. So that's pretty cool that you started it, and the timing is certainly good. I'm sure you didn't know ahead of time back in 2018 that how important supply chain management would become and how much of a buzzword it would
Agree.
become.
Agree. Just to add one thing and credit to you as well, because thanks to COVID, I find COVID pretty interesting actually. It has given two things to us. First of all, it forces us to watch videos. So my YouTube channel has gone bigger, and maybe yours, so we talking to each other. And second, it has proven that a lot of supply chain functions, in supply chain we manage information, right? Mostly to manage materials, to manage the money back. And we can do a lot of supply chain jobs remotely, right? Which gives us access. I mean, look at this conversation. We're connected digitally, and we're talking about it. So I am totally firm believer that supply chain has become global for last 2 3 decades anyway. But I am a firm believer that supply chain jobs will now also become global, very much like what happened to IT industry.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, even more so over time. And I'd love to hear too from the audience. Thank you for everyone who dropped in the chat where you're from, but I'd love to hear sort of what your role is, just for people that are joining us live here. Are you in the supply chain
Well,
field? What is your role? Are you a consultant? Are you just interested in supply chain management? I'd love to hear from the audience here in terms of how you fit into the supply chain world and sort of what your interests are. But as the audience is answering that question, another question for you, Muddassir, is what do you see as the biggest challenges in today's supply chain environment? Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's pretty well aware of supply chain bottlenecks and breakdowns and disruptions, but what do you see as the biggest issues just based on your experience in the supply chain?
I'm going to give you a short answer, but I'm going to give you a long answer later on as well, right? Because I think it's important to go back. The
Sure.
short answer here is, if you see the three V's of supply chain, the visibility, velocity, and variability. So we clearly have a big issue around the visibility. I think we all agree to that part as well, right? And which leads to the how we want to make our supply chain more agile, more faster, more from the velocity perspective, right? Well, one thing we are not trying to focus, we should focus on how we're going to reduce the variation in our processes and how we do business. right? And I think if we just focus more on standardization of work, standardization of best practices, standardization of operating principles within your supply chain organization and within your extended supply chain, both with customers and downstream and your suppliers upstream, it will definitely going to give you a better way to first increase the velocity and second improve the visibility. So somehow I tend to see there's less focus on reducing the variation of how you do business or how you run your supply chain, right? So I think there's a more focus required in the variation part. That's the
Right.
short answer,
Right.
right?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what
but
are the three V's again? So visibility, variation, and velocity.
visibility, velocity, and variability. So our aim in supply chain is to increase the visibility from upstream to downstream as much as possible, right? Our aim is to increase velocity of both information flow and material flow as quick as possible, because that's what we want, right? We need everything like super agile, now and Amazon style. And our aim is to reduce variability wherever possible.
Right. Right. So when you look at that 3V model, then how is that different, or what has changed within those 3Vs just in the post-pandemic world and this supply chain
Yeah,
constraint we're in?
because see, when the pandemic hits, it has caused basically a tsunami of disruptions, right? When it caused the tsunami of disruptions, that means now everybody needs to know where's my container, where's my beds, right? That has aggravated a huge amount of focus on visibility, right? But then, if you think about your the processes how you used to run before, your SNOP, your inventory management, your demand planning, your supply planning, it has been disrupted, and you don't have the, let's call it, process agility to deal with those disruptions, right? Because there's a variation in supply chain now. Call it bullwhip effect, call it whatever, right? But how you have basically redesigned your processes or how you make your processes agile enough to cater with those variations, right? Okay. Now,
Right.
last year nobody was getting an antenna. Then because as soon as the lead time goes wrong, what people do? Let's order more inventory. Everybody's ordering more inventory. Now, if you're in the market and asking people, everybody's saying, "Oh, I don't have a good sellout because I've got too much inventory." But you should not be ordering in the first place, right? You should be focusing on the lead time rather than ordering more, right? And this is what I'm
Right.
talking about, right? Is this knee-jerk reaction of the situation rather than saying, let's take a step back. We know what has happened, right? And then think about what is the right course of action, right? Ordering more inventory because you just got a long lead time may not be the right thing, because you don't know what's going to happen 6 to 12 months down the line. You might not be able to sell it, and that's actually what's happening right now.
Right. Yeah, that's a great connecting the dots of sort of the 3Vs being relevant throughout supply chains at any point in time, but sort of how it applies to today's supply chains too. Um,
Just,
so what?
just one more thing I want to add on this. So if you go back to the history and evolution part, so supply chain, and this is another important. I think this is also good for supply chain. So supply chain was never considered as a strategic function before COVID, and I think we all agree to that in some different nuance form, right? So supply chain was not even a word until 2000, right? So if you see the history of supply chain, it was like transportation, then 60s was distribution, then it was materials management, and then logistics management in 1990s, and then 2000 the supply chain has born, right? But from the 2010 onwards, so if you go to SM Dojo, I wrote a blog on evolution of supply chain logistics. The COVID has accelerated the digitalization of supply chain, I think, by 5x, right? It is faster and faster than it. If the COVID would have not happened, we probably won't be focusing on it. But now, because COVID has happened, now there's a huge push on supply chain digitalization, both integration, both upstream and downstream, either cloud solutions or ERP integrations, or whatever, right? Is to have a better visibility of the demand patterns, right? Which again, I think is turned out to be a good thing for supply chain strategically. So there's a focus on digitalization, there's a money on the table. That's why you are expert on it. That's why I watch your videos, and I think I do the same thing. And I think that's a good thing, right? What do you think about that, Eric?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's sort of accelerated a trend that was already starting, but it's fast tracked it, and it's exposed the pandemic exposed a lot of weaknesses and deficiencies in the supply chain. I think maybe we were fortunate for 10 or 20 years to have pretty stable supply chains, especially with
Mm,
globalization and it took a long time to build these global supply chains that worked really well in a predictable environment. But in an unpredictable environment, we were finding maybe it doesn't work so well. Maybe we need to rethink how we have the visibility and the variability in our processes and all that stuff. So, and that's a way digitization can help all those, the three
Yeah.
V's that you talked.
Yeah, and that's the future. And that's essentially the answer of this conversation, right? The future of supply chain. The future of supply chain is going toward more digital and building both digital competencies for your supply chain and for your people.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And here's a question from our audience, actually, that your response there was a perfect segue into this question from Roger on YouTube, and I'll put it up on the screen for those that are watching. But are supply chain implementations using SAP or NetSuite doing Agile? It's been a few years since I've done these implementations. Everyone was still on waterfall or a hybrid approach. And back to your point about digitization and use of technology in supply chains, what are your thoughts on this, especially as organizations have these knee-jerk reactions that you talked about, and they're trying to do stuff quickly? How do you see Agile fitting into supply chain transformations, or do you see Agile fitting in?
I definitely see agile fitting in. That's what it is designed, because the more digital we get, that means we are more getting into the or the best practices developed in IT industry. That I mean, I'm trying to make
Right.
it easy comparison, but I think it's a relevant comparison, right? Because what is digitalization? So I asked this question actually pretty much. So what is the difference between digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation? And it is astonishing that everybody says the same thing. But no, because I'm a researcher, right? I'm an academic guy at the same time. I want to differentiate the definition. There's a
Right.
clear differentiation. So my watch is basically a digital watch, but it used to be analog, right? So I made something analog to digital, right? Digitalization is then if I start producing data like health data, right, which is asking me to run more or do something, that means that is digitalization. Digital transformation is using technologies or digital technologies to improve your internal processes or provide more value to a customer. That is
Right.
digital transformation. So if you think you are digitalizing, yeah, you're using digital data to create more data to change some behavior, but you're not really changing your business model. If you're not really changing your business model, then you're not doing any digital transformation. So now with this very specific definition, I'm going to answer the question, right? So because again, we're talking about IT, so agile will definitely work. So everybody should learn agile. Everybody should know what is MVP. Everybody should know what is wireframing, because you all should be doing it. I can promise you that. If you don't know what is minimum viable product, if you don't know what is wireframing, start learning, right? It's all those terms. I've done a digital transformation project within Bridgestone. It was a success story, big time. I've learned that by doing it. So I'm promote this concept more and more, right? So buy a book called Lean Startup by Eric Ries, fantastic book. Okay, now if you Google right now, anybody sitting on a laptop, why ERP sucks, you should find SCM Dojo blog number one. And since you are an ERP expert, Eric, right? I mean, I think you should read that and give me your critical commentary.
I
One
will.
of
That's
my
a good.
yeah, so one of my critical commentary in that blog is, it's an old blog actually, 2.5 years old blog, that what ERP has done, even with SAP HANA. I never use NetSuite, so I'm not going to go down the NetSuite way because I don't know that ERP. Well, I know SAP, right? They've come up. They took this enterprise cloud, sorry, enterprise ERP, put them into the cloud. It still have this bloody same T code and bit more business analytics, and you can do some queries. I mean, I used to use Cognos 10 years ago. I used to write queries before in BPEX. So writing queries is not a new thing. So what is new actually? So my biggest criticism is following. ERP is the biggest database for your business, right? All your sales data, your planning data, your orders data, everything is there. Your routing data, everything is there. But why ERP right now is not smart? And I don't want to swear it because I don't know a lot of people are there. Why it's not smart? It's not smart enough to give me my predictive analytics, my prescriptive analytics. Why in this age I have to download all my planning data, then do my inventory optimization, made to order, made to stock analysis, and then decide to reduce my sales? SAP should have those ML AI rules built in and should be suggesting to us, right? Okay, you put a safety stock in, you're not selling, change it, right? Or convert this made to stock item to made to order item. The rule should be defined. So my biggest criticism is the ERP is still very much an old school ERP. It's just on the cloud, right? There isn't enough intelligence built in to drive digital transformation. So, okay, they have digitalized it, but still ERPs, the new ones, are not enabling businesses for digital transformation. And I'm happy to debate with anybody on this topic.
Yeah. What do you think that is? Is it just outdated technologies? Is it the wrong focus from companies that are implementing the technology, or what is it?
I think they're too big. It's too big. SAP is too big. I think we see the. I mean, you probably know more than me on this. If I'm not wrong, the top five ERP players cover 65% of the market, right? Between SAP,
Oh,
Microsoft, NetSuite, Oracle, right? and
yeah.
and they got so much, they make so much money in doing what they're doing, they probably don't need to. So I personally think there is a disruption required in the whole ERP market in itself. So ERP was a database with a fixed flows. I'm coming up with the theory of why don't we create a product which is workflow based and connected with databases, so you can actually have a more, let's call it, flexible workflows, which is linked to whatever database you wanted, and now you can do whatever after that. So I think there's potential of doing it if you think about it differently. Oh, thanks
Yeah.
for sharing the link actually. Yeah. Okay, somebody shared the link as well. Kyler, thank you.
Yep. And our marketing team just dropped in the chat the link to the Why ERP Sucks blog. And now I'm gonna have to go read it now. I'm intrigued. I want to know what your what your thoughts are on that. So I'll be sure to share some feedback with that too. So that's interesting because so just to back up for a second, then with this whole ERP versus today's supply chain issues, it seems like ERP and back to the original question, by the way, related to Agile versus waterfall. ERP in many ways is built, it's a big, massive integrated system, whether it's SAP or NetSuite or Oracle, any of those systems. It's a big, massive integrated system, which in some ways you think, well, a fast way to deploy it would be to use Agile, but they're just so broad and integrated and it's hard to do. But supply chain challenges today might require more of an Agile approach where you've got to fix some immediate pain or address some immediate opportunity that you have to improve your supply chain. Would you agree with that, or is that sort of what's pulling?
I 100% agree. So I left Bridgestone in October, but before that we were working on SAP HANA, and if you see the deployment plan was agile based as well. So you come in, you do your scenario planning, then you have an agile run, then you sit down with the consultant, and then they fix what they fix, and then you have a next agile run, right? So
Right.
it's definitely the way to go. Yes.
Okay. Good. So here's another question. This question is from Raphael on LinkedIn, and he makes a comment that I currently work in a distribution factory. The pandemic definitely exposed our weaknesses in communication. Um,
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious, is that something you've seen, or is that something you've seen that can be resolved potentially through technology and or organizational changes, or how do you see organizations dealing with this sort of dynamic that Raphael talks about here?
So I need a bit more elaboration from Raphael on the what do you mean by communication, like internal or external or market information? What exactly do
Let
you mean? So
let let's talk about, let's assume it's both, internal and internal with our
yeah,
own visibility into what we need internally, but also as with our customers as well.
yeah. So it's down to the point you make earlier, is this whole change of how we used to do business and run processes, very established supply chain and a way of communication, right? You send a PO, somebody acknowledge, don't acknowledge, they ship stuff, and whatever. You used to have a face-to-face meeting with your colleagues, you go and see them, any issues you sort it out. But if you're working remotely, then getting five people on the call at the same time is a ball ache, right? Because you have to make sure you send an invite, and then somebody dog is barking, somebody got some kids crying or whatever. So it's getting it is getting difficult, right? So both communication internally and externally is difficult with the supplier, right? But there, if you think about it, more and more tools are available right now. WhatsApp for business and Slack. I mean, Slack is $30 billion company right now just because it's a fantastic communication tools, right? So communication is an issue, definitely, and therefore the new communication apps are coming out, both business applications and both personal applications at the same time.
Right. Right.
Put this, I never used Slack before. I know Slack, I knew of Slack, but I only started using it was just a better and faster way to communicate.
Right. Right. Okay. What when you think about, I'm going to ask one more question related to supply chain in general, and then I might shift gears and talk about careers in supply chain.
Yeah.
But one question here is, how should organizations be rethinking their supply chains today? In other words, how should they view their supply chains? How should they be focusing on improving their supply chains today versus pre-2020, pre-pandemic? What's
Yeah,
changing
yeah.
in that?
So good questions. I would say when I see supply chain, I see in four dimensions really, right? I see in four different dimensions. Four. I have a actually very famous talk on four pillars of supply chain strategy, which is people, process, system, and execution, right? So when you're designing your supply chain, you're just looking post pandemic. So you need to look into really start from the people. Do we have the right people? Do we have the right competencies in place to do what we need to do, right? So you can't really say I'm gonna digitalize everything in my e-procurement and supply chain, and you don't have a people who actually understand cloud. I'm just saying, right? So you really got to understand how cloud works to go any digitalization effort, right? And believe me or not, most of the supply chain people doesn't come from any IT background and they don't understand cloud. I mean, using cloud application doesn't mean you understand cloud, by the way, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm just giving you an example. So how you upgrade them, how you want to coach them, how you want to mentor them, how you provide them the right knowledge, right? Okay, maybe. So that's one thing. Second thing, you need to look into your existing processes. One of my biggest bugbear of digitalization and again moving to the supply chain is you can't digitalize anything unless you have a standard process in place. You got to standardize to digitalize. So you need to start looking into it. Okay, we have had a standard process before, which is now disrupted post pandemic. We got new challenges in place. How are we gonna reshape and redesign our processes? Let's standardize those. Let's write it down. Let's write it down a better way to communicate. Maybe SNOP we used to run once in a month, maybe not good enough. Let's do twice a month, right? For
Mm.
example, right? Because there's more frequent changes. So process change. Then you need to take those people skills and processes and need to fit around the existing system, whatever system you're using, right? So you can't change the system overnight. It's expensive commodity. You got to, but you need to make sure the redesign processes are somehow configurable around the systems you have, or you need to buy a new piece of kit, or maybe develop your own. And then move to the execution part, which is probably the most interesting tip I can give you today. People hang up too much around, too much talking, too much discussion, too much time and effort in listing down a lot of action and not enough time on execution. And this is where I love the MVP theory. That what they say is you design a bare bone of the functional product or a process, then you test it out, give it to the user, right, and get a feedback, and then develop on it. So basically, what I'm saying is, if you want to drive change, improvement into the new challenges, don't come up with 200 different actions. Come up with like top five. Design that what you're actually going to do. Come up with the aggressive timeline and do it, and learn it and fail it and do it again and add more.
Right. Yeah. It's another case for the agile approach to transformation is being able to quickly deploy solutions that'll help the supply chains in today's environment. Now, shifting gears a little bit, then, how about careers? It seems like supply chain would be a great area. If I were starting straight out of college, I think supply chain management would probably be the thing I would do personally, especially today.
Absolutely.
What do
Absolutely.
you what are the trends in supply chain management careers?
100%. And I will actually ask our friend in marketing to go again to my channel, Carl. So if you go to my channel, there's a video called "Why Supply Chain is a Great 7 Reasons Why Supply Chain is a Great Career Choice." So if you Kyle can share it as well on my YouTube channel, it's in the I think it's the main video. So I think it's a fantastic career choice right away for many reasons. Apart from all the good things you already mentioned, there is a plenty of job opportunities around. It's a focus area. Now we have a seat on the table into the function. People even used to don't think supply chain as a function. If you ask people right now, marketing everybody knows, sales, HR, but people don't used to think supply chain as a function, right? But
Right.
now supply chain is a function. Everybody knows it, or we are telling people. So that's good. Jobs are good. Money is good, right? And the best part I would say is we are almost. I'll give a football analogy. So we are almost like a central midfielders, right? We can go back to defend if we want to. We can be attacking field. So we are connecting the football in the field, right? So we are talking to marketing people, finance people, we're talking about product management people, we're talking to IT people. You cannot implement ERP without IT, without us really, right? And essentially ERP is the IT system. The point, thank you for sharing. Paris has shared it as well. So the point is, you can don't have to if you don't like supply chain, that's okay, right? Spend 2 3 years. You can go to marketing. You can go to sales. In fact, you can go to operations. I've done a job of manufacturing, so it give you a many easier way to maneuver within the business, right? Even I had an analyst. He has a bachelor's in statistics. He worked with me as a supply chain analyst. Didn't like it. Moved to finance. So you can move to finance as an analyst. You can do whatever, right? So this goes. The second is give you a growing opportunity. I mean, which is the biggest company right now in the world? Apple. Who's the CEO of Apple? Tim Cook. Who is this guy? He's a supply chain guy. So you can become a CEO as well. Historically, you either have to be a sales guy or you have to be not. I should not use the word guy. Salesperson, salesman and woman, or financial man and woman to become the CEO, because that's like the almost a criteria, or MBA. You don't have to do now. Really don't have to, right? So you can be an engineer or supply, you can become a CEO. Another thing is, I have traveled about 38 countries, and I can tell you this: out of 38, 30 are company funded. I go to a lot of places, and thanks to supply chain, I go and see suppliers, I see customers. That's the other reason. The third thing, second last would be supply chain is never boring. There's always a flipping separate problem every day, and quite funny ones, right? So one day, quick story: I turn up to as a supply chain manager, and people said, "Oh, we need you on down in the warehouse." I was like, "What's the emergency?" He said, "There's a guy, he come on drunk, and he is on the forklift truck driving, and he's just asking you." I was like, "Why he's asking?" He was just drunk and he's driving. He just was asking. So I went to go down and take him out of his forklift truck, right? So, I mean, can you imagine that would be a problem in your workplace? But you face things like that. And I think lastly is supply chain is great fun. It's great fun. You can learn new things. It's not boring. So I can sell supply chain to a schemo. Yeah.
Right. It is super. I can't think of another discipline other than maybe IT that is such an
Yeah.
integrated discipline where you can learn, you have the opportunities to specialize in procurement or logistics or certain parts of supply chain management, warehouse management, whatever it is. But you also have to understand the whole big picture of how it all ties together. And I think that's something that's super cool about supply chain management. And the other thing too that I'd add is that, to what you said, is that I always look, whenever I think about giving advice to people for their careers, one thing I always think about is, where is their disruption? Where is there massive amounts of changes happening? Because that's where the opportunity is. And so
I
right
agree.
now,
I agree.
they're being disrupted, and these supply chain disruptions, they're not going to get fixed no matter what politicians do or no matter what we do. It's not going to get fixed in the next few months or probably even the next few years. It's going to have a ripple effect that, it's going to affect organizations for years to come. So I think it's a definitely a up and come, or it's a not up and coming. It's a very well established discipline, but I think there's going to be high demand for it for years to come.
Agree. And just to add to all the points both of us said is, so what happened to fintech in last 20 years? Fintech has gone phenomenally, right? And what happened to digital market? So if you are a marketing person right now, you will not be the same marketing person 10 years ago, right? Because the marketing was different 10 years ago. Same with finance. But if you think you're a supply chain person right now, you won't feel you could do a job 10 years ago, because there's not enough disruption between the decade. But what happened is, with the disruption of pandemic, the importance of supply chain has grown massively, and there's a huge amount of money has been put into startups. There's a lot of big startups are coming in. There's $87 billion has been put into supply chain startups. All those supply chain startups are bringing disruption. Some of them will survive, some of them will die. But even the ones who will survive will create more job opportunities, will create different job opportunities, right? Which does
Mm,
not even exist right now.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think if you also look at sub-disciplines or areas of uh, specialization within supply chain, you have, data science. You were talking about visibility and the ability to make use of data. If you have an interest in supply chain and technology, data science might be an area where you could sort of carve out a niche for yourself. Or if you're a business process type of person, helping re-engineer business processes. If you're a change management person, helping manage supply chains through their change and the human component of it. So, and then obviously on the technology side, you have, applications that are meant to improve supply chain. So There's a lot of different ways you can approach it, and then of course you have the internal functions like procurement or logistics or warehouse management, where you could specialize in doing the internal functions of a supply chain too. So there's just a massive amount of opportunity, and it's a global thing too, like you said earlier. So very, very good stuff. If I were new to supply chain management, or if I'm not in supply chain management and I'm either just coming out of college or maybe I'm mid-career and I want to make a change, I'm interested in getting into supply chain management. What are some of the things that I could do to break into the supply chain discipline? What would you recommend to someone who wants to make a pivot or a change into supply chain management?
Yeah. First of all, visit SCM Dojo. That is exactly what we do, right? We are here to exactly help you with this transaction. You will find a huge amount of content, knowledge, guides, best practices, videos, mostly free actually, to get yourself ready. I mean, there is a blog of top 3 jobs of a supply chain graduate, or what to do, how to find a job for a graduate, and we got plenty of content there to do it, right? So the first thing you do is that. Second thing you got to do is to start. One of the dilemma people will have is, I have no experience, where to start? And my suggestion is this: as long as you got some level of degree and you can do some level of analysis, right? And that's a great place to start, right? Is to inventory analyst, planning analyst, business analyst, right? You go there, you don't have to know the business or anything. You just need to know how to use any tools like Power BI, or Google Data Studio, or even Excel. You should be good in Excel, right? So you start from there, and then after 12 to 18 months, as soon as you understand the business and business model and the product, then you can start moving into more into planning or procurement or category, warehousing, wherever you want to move, right? So that would be, I think, the ideal start, I would say. But the thing is, I wouldn't even do a lot of expensive courses. I wouldn't say. I mean, as I said, we have a very subscription based model. I mean, you pay me $49 and you can have access to all the courses and things like that. So it's not a huge, you can Google anything, you can find it as well. So a huge amount of information is available. Just use the information, find a time for learning, because what generally I've seen it that when you graduate, you somehow think, okay, I've done everything. Now I'm gonna focus on practicality. It doesn't mean you stop learning. I would say making learning is a part of your half an hour, 1 hour daily regimen. I do it every day. I still do it after 20 years from graduating. So make sure you continue to learn.
Yeah, it's great advice for any discipline that you might be in.
Yeah.
What about if I'm already in supply chain management? Perhaps I'm already in one of those roles you just described, and I'm
Right.
just looking to further my career or advance. What would you
Cool.
recommend? Anything different for those types of people?
No, not really. I think the only thing I would say to that, in addition to the individual people, because if you go to our tools and self-assessment, we have created best practices. It may not make any sense to any graduate or young people who doesn't really work, but it will make huge amount of sense to anybody who has worked in supply chain, and they have existing problems and they want to looking for best practice to solve it. And that is our aim, solely to provide those best practices to help them do it. If you don't find any, if you're looking for something, ping me. But this is our core competency. We create best practices. We try to do proper research. We have a team behind it to make it available for people. For example, right now I'm creating a very comprehensive dashboard for warehousing and logistics. Right. So the procurement one is pretty famous. The KPI supply chain one was very famous. I'm creating a full, for example, dashboard for SNOP. Okay, you can run SNOP in super expensive software, but you don't want to buy it unless you have a SNOP software. So I'm creating a dashboard to help two people run SNOP on Excel. And once you have a process, then you go and buy a fancy software, no problem.
Right, right. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's good advice. Here's a comment that I want to get your thoughts on here. And this is from Richard on LinkedIn. He says it's no longer a supply chain; it's a supply marketplace, which is a very different risk model. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something you
Ooh,
heard or that you agree or disagree with?
this is a very advanced concept, right? And I think it's a very, very interesting. It's more a comment rather than a question, right?
Right.
So first of all, I say I agree, right? And I agree with my recent learning of a conference I attended. There's a what's her name, Dr. Eloise. She is writing a book, not coming out, and she's talking about the risk part in terms of supply chain, how the rules of war has been changed, right? So, for example, I think she has a very conspiracy like theory. She's saying, if I'm your if I want to damage you, the suppliers I work with, I know you are 400 suppliers. Your supply chain risk assessment is so weak that I could become your supplier, for example, and I could really damage your credibility, and you won't even know about it,
Mm,
right? and
right.
and then she gives some military examples how I don't want to go into the book and what she gave examples for, that how America and few other people are really I think some military example where it was a deliberate effort by a country to become a supplier for the army to make sure they damage their supply chains and not to make the armors. I don't know how she get hold of this information, but there's
Right.
two three things she mentioned which is pretty realistic if you think about it.
Hmm. Interesting. So what exactly is maybe I'll turn that comment into a question, but what exactly is a supply marketplace and how is that different from a traditional supply chain? How would you describe that or simplify that for the audience?
Yeah, I would I would say from the let's do this. So historically, the global supply chain was a success story, still is if you think about it, right? Apple is very successful because the way they designed the supply chain. Amazon is and or was, right? So market, I would say, what is the marketplace? The marketplace is there's more than one player, right? You're competing for same business. So when I say I'm at SimDujo is a marketplace, what I mean by that is I have more than 10, experts right now. You can pick one, right? You need to evaluate and you have to pick one and you have to more deal on a case to case basis and the project to project basis, right? So this model is pretty reverse to the whole concept of strategic SRM, supply relationship management. If you pick any book of ISM or SIPs, they keep talking about strategic partnership, strategic supplier, strategic collaboration, strategic this, strategic that. Then you have to be very so. But marketplace model is actually on the other scale, right? So if it's
Hmm.
on the other scale and it's disruptive, it is successful and it's proven, right? Which it is, then why it will not be proven in supply chain? It comes with the risk, but it just needs a more robust platform to manage, and that's what we aim to do.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I can see that being a trend in the future or a way that further transforms or further disrupts traditional
Yeah,
supply chain.
yeah. Let me give you examples. So right now, okay, you have we talked about analyst, right? Analyst is data science, very good important skills, right? Or supply chain network design, right? For example, everybody wants to do supply chain. You have to look into your supply chain and see you have the right warehouses into right places with the right workflow center of gravity. But why would you want that skill in house? I don't think you need that skill in house because you don't do this kind of analysis every month or every week, right? They are
Right.
very specialized set of skills, right? So I mean, you are an expert in ERP implementation, and the cleanup of the ERP data is specialized skills. Is a specialized skills. No, you can't have it in house. So my
Right.
point is those kind of specialized skill set is a marketplace jobs where boutique consultancies or boutique experts are available. You can go and get them and then hire them to do whatever they want to do. With the same thought process, you can apply to material purchasing or technology purchasing, right? So with the same can be applied, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Interesting. So I guess just to bring this all full circle and sort of bring the whole discussion around supply chain trends and supply chain careers, just to close the loop and sort of summarize everything we've talked about, what closing advice would you leave for supply chain practitioners and others that are affected by supply chains? What advice would you give them as they look to the future of their careers as well as the supply chain in general?
Cool, cool, cool. Can I share my screen? Maybe not, right? So okay, let me just give me 1 minute. If you can give me one. Can I just take 1 minute or 30
Sure.
seconds?
Yeah, yeah, please do.
Right. So I'm gonna show you something which will answer the question more appropriately than me waffling about. Where is this picture gone? Okay, good. Is this possible? I can share a screen here. Possible? No.
You should see a share screen button in the bottom right of your below where you and
Right.
I are listed.
Cool. Right. Okay. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you see?
Oh, I have to accept it here. 1 second. There we go. Yep,
Right.
we see it now.
Can you see now? Okay, so this is my theory, which we're trying to push it through. So if you're in supply chain, you have been in supply chain, that means you are have some level of supply chain competencies, right? So We call it, I call it hygiene factor. You have it anyway. If you don't have it, you got to learn it, right? Otherwise, you're not in supply chain. Then
Right.
the second factor is your people skills, which I mentioned in terms of your communication skills, presentation skills, negotiation, managing up and down. It also involves your social media skills somehow. So if you go to STEAM Dojo right now, we have a course on how to improve your LinkedIn profile actually, because right now if you're applying for a jobs, people actually Google you first and call you for interview later. In fact, and when they Google it, they're expecting you to have your profile on LinkedIn, right? I
Right.
actually, in last 3 years, never call for anybody for interview unless you're in LinkedIn. Maybe I'm
Hmm.
biased, maybe I'm not, but that's what I do, right?
Right.
So having a very nice LinkedIn profile, which is better than your CV, is there. But we have a course for that. The third part I would say is the technological know-how, all the emerging technologies, right? Understanding what's happening in the technological space. If I come back to my picture again, so everybody using these buzzwords of IoT, or basically they're using blockchain, 3D printing, blah blah blah, right? But you need to know which application is used where,
Hmm.
right? You need to know that which part of the technology fits into which part of the supply chain. So IoT is more connected devices, give you more visibility, more data. If you're thinking about the security, transparency, blockchain. If you're talking about collaborative supply planning, you need to know about cloud a bit more. If you're thinking about predictive and prescriptive analysis, you need to know data science. The point is understanding the technology and which and where it is used in supply chain. And that's the final answer. That's the book I was talking to Eric, I think, before our talk, right? So I'm writing a
Right.
book on supply chain digitalization for supply chain managers. 80% done. Hopefully, it will be out this year. And the whole purpose of that book is to give this lessons, or not lesson, message to people that understand the technology and try to link with the right portion or right segment of the supply chain.
Right. Right. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, that's good. Good advice.
Yeah. So just to summarize this, so as a supply chain competencies right now in itself, I think is one third of your skill set, maybe
Hmm.
40%. You got to improve your people skills, right, to be grow in your job. Because okay, if I'm not a better leader, if I'm not know how to lead people, if I don't know how to manage projects, right, I'm never gonna become a supply chain leader or manager. It's just not going to happen. I just stay what I do. So you got to become those kind of all things. But then if you really want to become grow further and improve your supply chain, you got to understand technology. So you need all these three things. And the dilemma I feel in the current curriculum is, pick any, they're not really focusing on the two part. They're not focusing on the people part as much, and not focusing on technology part as much. They're still going about supply chain competencies, which I think they are doing a great job, but it's old school right now. We should move on.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that that's a good visual, those, the discussion of those three areas, those three competencies, because so many people want to focus on one. And you can have a primary area that you're strongest in, of course, but the more you can focus on developing all three of those areas, I think you're just going to be in higher demand, and you're going to be a more rare find within the industry.
Yeah. There's a question from Kohan I see. It's an interesting question. I can answer quickly. What is the best visibility solution in the market for a multi-factory, multi-country, multi-year? There's a company called Project 44. Google that.
Project 44.
Project 44, yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's
They
good.
worth
Good.
right now $1.7 billion is a startup.
Okay. It's great. Great question and great advice. Now I'm curious. I'm going to have to go Google that as soon as we're done here. But well, good. Well, I want to thank you for your time. We're out of time. That time flew by. I really appreciate your time here today. Very enlightening discussion, both in terms of supply chains in general, but also the career aspects of supply chain management. So thank you very much for being here, Dr. Ahmed. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me, and hopefully I'll invite you in my show, because I also have a show called the Supply Chain Show, and I'll get you in there as well soon. We'll be in touch.
Absolutely. I'd love to be a guest. And in the meantime, for the audience, thank you to the audience for being here. But be sure to check out
Yeah.
semdojo.com for more training materials and courses and content related to supply chain management. So thank you for sharing that. And you can also check out our website. We've got, as it relates to supply chain technology and transformation in particular,
Yeah.
go to thirdstage-consulting.com
I,
for that.
and I really like your videos actually. I think the work you're doing is short and sweet, and I think we need more content from you as well. So thank you for the audience. Thank you for having me. I love this conversation. Pleasure is mine.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and you'll find this interview is going to become part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast, which comes out a week from tomorrow. So every Wednesday, we have new episodes of the Transformation Ground Control podcast. So thank you for being part of the live audience and the production of that podcast that gets released next week. And have a great week, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday in our next live stream. Take care, everyone.